Good morning, everyone. My name is Jordan Owens, and I'm the Director of Cabinet Communications for the Government of Yukon. Thank you for joining us today. This is the Government of Yukon's 7th technical briefing on the heap leach failure that occurred at the Eagle Gold Mine on June 24th, 2024. The government's goal remains to openly and transparently communicate with the public about the work that has been done to date by our government to protect the health and safety of Yukoners and the environment in response to the heap leach failure at Victoria Gold's Eagle Gold Mine. In response to media requests, today's briefing includes representatives from the Department of Justice, Department of Energy, Mines and Resources, and the Department of Environment. On behalf of the Government of Yukon, I want to say that we appreciate that many people will have questions and concerns about this situation. As the situation continues to develop, we won't have all of the answers yet, but these hardworking folks are here to share what we do know today. Should members of the media have questions that cannot be addressed today by these subject matter experts, or if we do not have time to answer all of your questions today, feel free to reach out to me at jordan.owens, that's jordan.owens, @yukon.ca, and I will be happy to direct your questions to the appropriate department. I understand that this briefing is being live streamed by news outlets, and I would like to welcome members of the public who are joining us as well. The Yukon government will post a recording of this briefing on Facebook later today. We will also be regularly updating the yukon.ca Victoria Gold online hub, which can be found at yukon.ca/Victoria-gold-updates. I would now like to introduce the speakers and technical experts here today. There will be some introductory comments before opening the floor to your questions. From the Department of Justice, we have the Attorney General and Minister of Justice, Tracy Ann McPhee, who represents the Riverdale South riding in the Legislative Assembly. From the Department of Energy, Mines and Resources, we are joined by Deputy Minister Lauren Haney. From the Department of Environment, we are joined once again by Water Resources Scientist Tyler Williams and Senior Fisheries Biologist Cameron Sinclair. There are also several experts in the room who are joining us as well. Thank you all for being here. We will start with you, Minister McPhee.
Thanks very much, Jordan. Thank you, everyone, for taking the time to be here today. Good morning. Appreciate the opportunity to speak with you today. Before we begin, I want to acknowledge that we are gathered here today on the traditional territories of the Kwalin First Nation and the Ta'an Kwachan Council to discuss the aftermath of the Eagle Gold Mine heap leach failure that occurred on the traditional territories of the First Nation of Natchel-Nayakdun. My name, for those of you who don't know me, is Tracy Ann McPhee. I'm here in my role as Attorney General, as Jordan has said, and Minister of Justice, and to provide information about the Government of Yukon's recent court application concerning Victoria Gold Corporation. For those of you who don't know me, I'm a lawyer and I've practiced here in the territory for now, I'm going to age myself, more than 32 years. Since June 24th of 2024, the Department of Energy, Mines and Resources of the Government of Yukon has issued 4 separate sets of inspectors' directions to the Victoria Gold Corporation. The purpose of these directions was to ensure, and is to ensure, that Victoria Gold was responding appropriately to protect land, water, and the well-being of people on the traditional territory of the First Nation of Natchel-Nayakdun and all Yukoners. While the company implemented some of those directions, they did not complete them all. The lack of action by Victoria Gold left serious concerns about the health and environmental impacts of the heap leach failure. This is a serious and urgent situation. Earlier this week, the Government of Yukon made an application in the Ontario Superior Court of Justice to have the receiver appointed over the assets of Victoria Gold, including the Eagle Mine. On Wednesday, August the 14th, the court granted our application, appointing PricewaterhouseCoopers Inc. as the court-appointed receiver. PricewaterhouseCoopers will act in consultation with the Government of the Yukon. The court also appointed Parsons Inc. as the lead environmental consultant. They will work closely with the receiver to support the required mitigation efforts, including compliance with the government's directions. There are many types of receivership. The authority granted through this process has a limited scope. I want to be clear that the intention of this receivership is to work to bring Eagle Gold Mine site and the surrounding environment back to the state it was in prior to the failure on June the 24th as best as possible. It is not to move the mine into permanent closure or to begin reclamation work. We are not selling assets, and neither will the PricewaterhouseCoopers, named as the receiver, or move the mine into closure or begin reclamation work. These are all things that are not happening. The court has granted authority to the receiver to carry out the work that was directed by the Yukon government inspectors under their statutory powers. Eventually, internal and external investigations will reveal what happened on or before the 24th of June that led to the failure of the heap leach facility. This legal action gives us a pathway to use the assets of the company responsible for the environmental damage to pay for the costs of addressing that damage. The government of Yukon has agreed to advance the funds necessary for this urgent work, but the company's own assets and funds will be used first by the receiver. Once those have been exhausted, the funds advanced by the Yukon government will be a debt owed to government, and we will have a priority charge to recover them if and when the assets of Victoria Gold are sold by the receiver under its court-ordered powers. This process also provides a transparent and public forum for all affected parties to voice their concerns and to have them addressed in a court-supervised process. Moving forward, we'll continue to maintain communication with the First Nation of Nacho as we work with the receiver and the lead environmental consultant to carry out the necessary mitigation work. We'll also continue to update the public about what is happening at the Eagle Gold Mine site. We remain committed to using every legal mechanism available to hold Victoria Gold accountable for the costs of this work and to ensure that the protection of the environment and the health and safety of Yukoners is the top priority. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister. We'll now turn it over to Deputy Minister Lauren Haney from the Department of Energy, Mines and Resources.
Good morning. The situation will look very different going forward with the receivership in place. The receivership provides the framework and the opportunity we need to advance the critical work that must be done immediately in terms of environmental protection and remediation. The receiver, PricewaterhouseCoopers, and Parsons as the lead environmental consultant are both globally recognized firms with excellence in this very field. They bring the resources and the experience we need to address this very large, complex situation. Representatives from PwC, from Parsons, Yukon government, as well as the First Nation of Nacho were on site immediately upon granting of the order. There to speak directly with Victoria Gold representatives on site and start to do a rapid assessment of what needs to be undertaken and prioritized from the perspective of health and safety, as well as actioning the outstanding inspectors' directions that we've issued. YG's role and authority as a regulator is maintained under this receivership and under the court order. And our commitment to continue to work with the First Nation of Nacho to determine what actions must be undertaken on site will continue. Thank you.
Thank you, Deputy Minister Haney. We'll now turn it over to the Department of Environment, beginning with Water Resources Scientist Tyler Williams.
Thanks, Jordan. Hello, everyone. My name is Tyler Williams. I'm a Water Resource Scientist with the Department of Environment's Water Resources branch. I'll give an update today on water sampling results up to and including August 8. These are the most recent sample results that we have available to us at this time. Last week, my colleagues shared information about the discharge of water from the mine water treatment plant between July 31st and August 2nd. Following the discharge, there was a sharp increase in the concentration of cyanide found in samples taken from various sampling locations in Haggard Creek. These samples exceeded the acute or short-term guideline for aquatic life. We've continued to collect daily samples from monitoring locations in Haggard Creek and the South McQuestion River according to our water monitoring and reporting plan. The samples that were collected in the days following the discharge between August 3 and 8 show that cyanide levels in Haggard Creek have returned to levels similar to those we were seeing prior to the discharge event, which is generally between 0.003 and 0.006 milligrams per liter at locations closer to the mine site. This is right around the chronic or long-term aquatic life guideline of 0.005 milligrams per liter for cyanide, and well below the drinking water guideline for cyanide, which is 0.2 milligrams per liter. Exact results for each day and each sampling location can be found online at yukon.ca/victoria-gold-updates. In addition to the cyanide results, data show increases in ammonia and nitrate in Haggard Creek during the discharge period. However, these increases remain below relevant guidelines and objectives, and similarly returned to pre-discharge levels on August 3rd. There's also equipment in place in various locations in Haggard Creek that measure the temperature of the water every 5 minutes. We observed no significant impact on water temperature in Haggard Creek through the duration of the discharge. Water monitoring in Haggard Creek also includes other parameters such as metals, chloride, and hardness. We've observed no adverse impacts to these parameters during the discharge period. In summary, cyanide was the primary contaminant that we observed in Haggard Creek following the discharge. It moved through Haggard Creek within a 2-day period, and our results from the week following the discharge show that cyanide concentration in Haggard Creek has returned to pre-discharge levels, which is generally between 0.03 and 0.006 milligrams per liter. I'll now pass it over to Cameron to give a brief update on the fish situation. Thank you.
Thanks, Tyler. My name is Cameron Sinclair. I'm the Senior Fisheries Biologist with Environment. As Tyler mentioned, I wanted to reiterate that there's no indication that the water temperature or hardness caused the death of fish that was observed on August 2nd. And to update from a couple questions last week, despite requests, we've not been provided with the specific number of each species. However, this information is now part of ongoing investigative efforts by Fisheries and Oceans Canada, and we expect it will be shared with us. Additional work is ongoing this week between the Government of Yukon and the First Nation of Nacho-Naik-Dun in a separate watershed to acquire Arctic grayling tissue samples to further improve our understanding of heavy metal contamination within their traditional territory. This work is going to help us in our long-term comparative analysis with the samples that we've taken in Haggard Creek. The Department of Environment and the First Nation of Nacho-Naik-Dun continue to implement our long-term fish and water monitoring plans in the area, which will include direction to the receiver's environmental consultants to help support that all work maintains the ecological integrity of the area and allows us to really detect change over time. We anticipate meeting with that consultant to provide direction. As we collect more information about fish health in the area, we will continue to provide regular updates, which can be found on yukon.ca.
Thank you so much for your updates. I will now open the floor to questions, beginning here in the room. In the interest of fairness, we'll begin by giving each reporter one question and one follow-up. If possible, please keep your question concise and identify to whom your question is directed. For the folks joining online, please, if you could indicate in the chat if you have a question that you'd like to ask. And if your name and media outlet is not already part of your username, please indicate that as well. Beginning in the room, I'll just go in the order in which people arrived. So we'll start with Sarah Exnos from Radio Canada.
Hi, good morning. My question is for Minister McPhee. With all the board of Victoria Gold walking out less than 24 hours after the receivership was granted, do you still think it was the best course of action in the long term And how is this going to impact the transition with YG?
I'm not sure about the last part of your question about transition, but let me see if I can answer the first part, and then we can see if I've done, given you the information you need. I absolutely have the highest confidence in the application that was brought this week. The court emphasized the judge did in her decision that in fact, this was the most appropriate path forward in the circumstances for the Yukon government, that it was actually the only path forward, and we were very careful to pursue a process that would allow for the company to reopen and for mining to resume on that site. So that was absolutely part of the decision-making. The decision, let me say that during the submissions made in court, the territorial government made clear that its application and in its materials and verbally in the court, that the receivership and the environmental, focused on environmental remediation was the intention, that we had fully intended that Victoria Gold would go back into a position, as I said earlier in my opening remarks, as it was, as best as possible on the 23rd of June, the day before the heap leach failed, and absolutely not to put it out of business. The decision by the board of Victoria Gold to resign is their decision, and it is not, they were not directed to resign by the receiver or by Yukon government, and company's management and the board have made that decision on their own. I should also say that during the submissions in court, that the counsel for Victoria Gold Corporation asked for an adjournment. The first part of this application was a strenuous submissions by all parties about why this matter should not go forward in court. The judge ultimately decided that she was not persuaded that there should be an adjournment and proceeded with the hearing on Wednesday. But part of the submission made by Victoria Gold, which is all open public record, was that they intended to bring their own application under the CCAA process. It's the company's Creditors Arrangement Act, which is about declarations of insolvency and restructuring of a company. So that quickly provided the other counsel with the information that Victoria Gold was thinking about that prior to the receivership application coming forward. So in answer to your first part of that question, we were very careful to make sure there was a process that would allow a path forward for Victoria Gold and for mining to continue on that site. We were careful that that would be an option open. We made submissions on that basis. The court accepted the submissions made by Yukon government that the environmental issues, the public safety issues on that site were of primary concern. They were of primary concern to Yukon government. We did not believe that they were being properly addressed by the company at that time, and we believed that the receiver should be put in place so that those things could be dealt with, observed, assessed, and mitigated.
Thank you, Sarah. Did you have a follow-up?
Thank you. And I'm not quite sure if the question is for you again, or maybe Deputy Minister. Now that YG has access to the site, fully access to the site, will that help to have an independent inquiry?
You want to go and I can go too. Sure. Yeah.
I don't, it doesn't change that, actually. Yeah, I would say it ensures we can get access to information that we need, but that commitment is being undertaken in parallel.
Thank you. Now moving on to Sarah Connors from APTN.
Hi, I think my question might be for the Deputy Minister. I just want to be very clear, just so I understand. Now that Victoria Gold's board has resigned, does this now mean it's entirely YG that is responsible for cleanup of the site?
No, and I should have characterized that previously as well. So it is not YG responsible for care and control of the site. It is the receiver, PwC. So the court appointed the receiver. They have care and control of the site, the company, its assets. I would say too, just recognizing that YG again remains the regulator and informing both the lead environmental consultant and the receiver of what work needs to be done on site, of what remediation actions are necessary. And that's what we're doing, again, in collaboration with the First Nation of Nacho-Nayagdun, which is what we've been doing to date.
Thanks, Sarah. Did you have a follow-up?
Again, I think this is for the Deputy Minister. I think it was yesterday, the Yukon party said the company should have remained on site and, kind of stayed on there. I guess, what is just your response to their concerns?
Thanks for the question. I'm happy to answer. My understanding of the news release, I think it was a news release by the opposition Yukon party, was that they believed that Victoria Gold should be responsible for the mitigation work. What we know is that in the last 6 weeks, Victoria Gold has not completed the directions made by Yukon government, the regulator, on behalf of the Yukon public and our First Nations partners and governments in this territory to adequately address the environmental concerns that are happening on that site right now. The application that we've made is to put a receiver in place so that person, that company will be responsible along with the lead environmental consultant to do that work. I understand, not having read their news release, that they also note that Victoria Gold should remain on site so they'd be financially responsible. This process requires them to be financially responsible. Their assets will be used by PricewaterhouseCoopers to do this work. And in the event that there is more work to do than the assets of Victoria Gold, then the government of Yukon will be responsible for loaning those funds, as I said in my opening remarks, to PricewaterhouseCoopers for the purpose of completing that work. And then that will be a debt owed to the Yukon government, and that's on behalf of Yukon public.
Thank you. We'll now go to Macklin Link from CKRW.
Thanks. I'm not sure who's best to answer this question, but I'll just throw it out there. Was there a particular instance where YG knew that applying for receivership was the best course of action, or was that a long-term sort of thing?
I can do that if you want. When the heap leach facility failed on the 24th of June, and Lauren can speak to the work, the enormous amount of work that's been happening on behalf of government and her department and under her leadership, and the other departments, environment, the Department of Fisheries at the federal level, justice, energy, mines and resources, environment here in the territory, the Department of Finance. All options were explored on behalf of government to determine what was happening, that we could, what information we could glean from what was happening there, remembering we weren't on site, and determine what was the best course of action. And the directions were issued. We had full hope and faith that those directions would be followed, because we believe that those directions are the steps that need to be taken to protect the environment and to protect the health and safety of individuals. And as the time unfolded and those were not met with compliance by the company, the options continued to be investigated as to what was the best course of action. And as I said, we carefully chose this course of action so that Victoria Gold and mining could resume on that site. This is not the end of that company from our point of view. The submissions made to the court made it very clear that we had no intention of ending the work of that corporation, but that the environmental concerns were simply not being addressed to our satisfaction with the urgency that was necessary.
Macklin, did you have a follow-up? Other side.
So I understand the Nashanayak Dun First Nation has also applied for a receivership. Is that just sort of nullified now that there's a receiver?
It's not automatic. We expect that they'll make the decision that they need to. They were party to the application that happened here in Ontario on Wednesday on behalf of the Yukon government's application. They were very supportive of this application, and you'll need to ask them what's going to happen with their matter. I understand their matter was filed in the Supreme Court of the Yukon, which is also a possibility, but I also think that they didn't necessarily have a receiver named. So this process might well mean that they make a decision not to proceed, but you'll have to ask them that.
Thank you. Now over to Jim Elliott from the Yukon News.
Yes, thank you. Probably one for the Deputy Minister here. I was just wondering if you could tell us any more about how the cost estimate that was included in that application was arrived at.
Sure. It was, I will emphasize, a preliminary cost estimate that we generated within Yukon government with the support of our technical consultants. Again, to give a preliminary rough estimate of the amount of work and the cost associated with it that we anticipate in the next few months. And emphasizing as well as we have before that this is the critical time right now and before freeze up, sort of mid-October to late October. So there's a tremendous amount of work to be done on the site.
Jim, did you have a follow-up? You're good? You do. All right. Could you use the microphone?
Still making me sound like a robot. Yeah,
Mine too.
Okay, is that any better?
Yes.
Okay, sure. Okay, thank you. I was also just wondering if there had been any preliminary assessment of Victoria Gold's assets and if we know how much of that work their assets might pay for.
Yeah, absolutely. So that is the receiver's job, and that is ongoing. And there to emphasize as well, PwC is a global company, and this is what they do. This is their business. So they were actioned immediately on site as well as in Vancouver, in Toronto, at the head offices of the company to do that work. So it is ongoing.
Thank you. We'll now go to Katrin Pilkington from the CBC.
So this is a question for the Deputy Minister. Victoria Gold told us earlier this week that concerns, or no, not the Deputy Minister, this question. This is for either Tyler or Cameron. Victoria Gold told us earlier this week that concerns about instability at the site have passed. Has the government been able to sample groundwater in the areas that you weren't able to previously yet?
I can touch on the groundwater aspect of that, which no, the Core Geo or Yukon government has not been able to access the groundwater wells in the exclusion zone to sample. We still do know other things about groundwater from other water that's reporting to surface. So we know, as my colleague spoke to last week, that the groundwater that's reporting to the water management ponds is surfacing through seeps in the area is highly contaminated. We know that groundwater has reached Dublin Gulch, and those results that we're seeing water quality in Dublin Gulch are a result of contaminated groundwater reaching the creek, which is then flowing into Hager Creek. So no, we haven't been able to access the wells, but yeah, we still have some information about groundwater. And additionally, there's work ongoing now to start drilling wells outside the exclusion area. So I don't have a timeline on that yet. I know those discussions are ongoing and locations are being picked for that work.
If I can add to that, so the significant health and safety concerns because of stability risks with the heap remain. And so we did mobilize a contractor. Well, I'll back up. I'll start with the safety berm. In terms of the actions consistent with the inspector's direction that YG was trying to undertake directly, we were set out to build the safety berm in order to be able to install groundwater wells to monitor and intercept groundwater behind that safety berm. As you were aware previously, we commenced that construction. It stopped because of safety concerns. We have not been able to get back on site because of safety concerns to continue that work. We then mobilized our contractor to attempt to drill groundwater monitoring and interception wells in other places on the site. And literally within the same day, because of emerging geotechnical risk issues with the heap, our geotechnical engineering consultants required that, or recommended, and we followed the recommendation that, sorry, to demob our contractors because of the increased risk that they saw.
Katrin, did you have a follow-up?
Yes, thank you. So given the seriousness of contamination in groundwater, which I understand is part of what makes sites like Faro so complex to remediate, is there, how many years might it be before this site is profitable again? Just how complex might it be to restore the site to what it was before June 24th? Do you have any idea of that yet?
We don't know that yet. That's the work being undertaken right now, and which we have started work on prior to the receivership being in place, is to try to assess the extent of the impact and being able to install groundwater wells to monitor what's happening within the groundwater system is absolutely critical. You raise Faro, and we actually have some of the same people who designed the groundwater interception system at Faro on this team. And so some of that thinking and that principle of being able to intercept groundwater to treat it is being applied here as well. But there's still a lot of work to do in terms of planning and being able to understand what the longer term implications are.
Thank you. Appreciating the patience of the folks online, we will now move over to their questions. First up is Blair McBride from the Northern Miner. Blair, can you hear us?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Please go ahead.
Great. So the court filing from Wednesday explains that approximately $40 to $50 million will be needed in the next 90 days to remedy the situation at the Eagle site. Can you speak a little bit about what exactly needs to be done in those next 90 days that's so critical?
Sure. So that I'll start by saying the primary focus of that scope of work was undertaking the outstanding inspector's directions. So that's around adding additional water storage capacity on site in terms of building ponds, the geotechnical stability piece, the groundwater well interception scope as well, which is critical. Also the water treatment system. So those were the major pieces, and we also had camp services, all sorts of the ongoing requirements to be on the site as well. And there will be, so that's what we built that scope around. But now that Parsons is involved, and along with us and our technical experts and the experts with the First Nation of Nacho-Nyak-Dun, our near-term work is to determine what else needs to be done in these critical 90 days.
Thank you. Blair, did you have a follow-up question?
Yes. And then so it was also mentioned in the court document that because of the financial situation of Victoria Gold, this is why it wanted to go for the CCAA route instead. But I guess my question is, with its financial situation being what it is, how much has the Yukon government spent of its own funds so far in the remediation work if Victoria Gold hasn't been able to cover it all themselves?
I don't have the accurate estimate of that right now, but I can get that to you.
Thank you. Now moving on to Daryl Greer with the Canadian Press.
Hello, I believe this first question would be for the Deputy Minister. The company provided security to the Yukon government prior to the mine operating. Has that not been touched?
I'm happy to answer that if you don't mind, Daryl. There is security have been provided to the Yukon government by Victoria Gold and by companies who are in the business of providing that kind of security. It has not been accessed at this time. It is an option going forward to explore whether or not the security should be used and can be used in these circumstances.
Thank you, Minister. Daryl, did you have a follow-up?
Well, yes. I don't know if this is directed towards Mr. Mulligan or Sinclair, but their comments indicated that the comments by Mr. McConnell in the past blaming hardness of the water and the temperature of the water for this fish kills is not indicated by their testing. Is that a tacit admission of your belief that the company has misrepresented itself? And is there any further action that can be taken to ensure that the individuals involved in this company and its actions that have been called out time and again by regulators, even years prior to this incident, is there any measures that can be taken to hold these individuals accountable? Or as the Director of Lands and Resources for the First Nation, Nacho-Nyak-Dun, has indicated in her affidavit, that miners in the Yukon have time and time again declared bankruptcy, walked away, and put the reclamation responsibilities onto governments and then by extension the taxpayers.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, sir. I'll talk to just about the fish kill and the temperature and hardness that you referred to. We're just going on the data that Tyler has presented and going above those CCME guidelines and what affects fish and what doesn't affect fish. And the data that was shown is pretty clear that there's high levels of cyanide above the CCME levels. And like Dr. Mary Vanderkop stated last week, is really consistent with that large die-off of fish in multiple species as opposed to temperature or hardness. So it's not more of a belief, it's just we're following the data and that's what the data shows.
I can add a little bit to that, which I think is the second part of your question, and that is that having the receiver in place, even with the scope of their work now, which a primary part of that work will be to discover and assess the assets of Victoria Gold, wherever they may be held, and determine how those funds can be used to mitigate the site at this time. We're not yet talking about reclamation. We still hold out hope that mining can occur at this site, that there can be mitigation to return the site to a viable mine. And certainly we'll continue along that path. The receivership, the choice of receivership in this way is critical. I certainly take your point that there have been concerns about mining companies in the past in the Yukon. Mining remains an important aspect of our economy here, and it must be done safely, and it must be done to the benefit of all Yukoners as well as to the corporations that undertake it. So we look forward to the work that PricewaterhouseCoopers will do to discover and assess the assets of Victoria Gold and to use them at this stage for mitigation of the environment and health and safety issues.
Thank you, Minister. Now moving on to Niall McGee with the Globe and Mail. Can you hear us? Because we cannot hear you. Sorry, just to interrupt, we're having a really difficult time hearing you.
Can you hear me? Can you hear me?
You're having technical issues. If you have the opportunity, maybe you could type your question into the chat. And while you're going to type it into the chat? Great. While we wait for that to come through, I'll open it back up to folks in the room to see if there are any additional questions. Katrin?
This is a question for the Deputy Minister. Given the repeated issues with the private sector running Yukon mines, would the government ever consider forming a crown corporation to assume mineral rights and carry out mining to ensure it actually benefits Yukoners?
It's not something we've contemplated at this time.
Jim?
Thank you. When assessing Victoria Gold's assets, does that include gold that is still within the heap? And does is the receiver authorized to retrieve that to fund reclamation or cleanup activities?
So I don't know for sure the extent of what they're looking at. I can say because the licenses still apply on the site. And right now, under the QML, under the quartz mining license, the site is in temporary closure. And under that, pursuant to that, no production is allowed.
Thank you. Sorry, I'm just getting a question here. He's asking, is the Yukon open to possibly banning heap leach?
As the Premier has committed to, for the time being, we are not issuing licenses for heap leach projects until the outcomes of the independent review board are known and incorporated into our policies and practices. At this point, that's what's being contemplated and committed to.
Thank you. And we've got a follow-up from Neil, which is it true that the security bond that the Yukon holds cannot be used for the ongoing remediation of the site?
No, that's not true. I mean, there needs to be a full assessment of whether or not there are other reasons why we may or may not want to try to access that bond. And of course, we would need to work with the companies that hold, I understand there's two separate bonds that hold those bonds, but it is, it's my understanding that it is still an option to help pay for the kind of work that is anticipated at this time by the receiver and by the lead environmental consultant.
Thank you. Recognizing that we've got a couple of minutes left, I'll turn it once again to folks in the room to see if they've got any additional questions before wrapping things up today. Wonderful. Well, please do feel free to reach out to me with any additional questions, and we'll do our best to address those in a timely fashion. I would also like to remind everyone that more information on the Government of Yukon's efforts to address the Victoria Gold heap leach failure can be found at yukon.ca/Victoria-Gold-updates. This website is regularly updated as more information becomes available. Thank you to our speakers, technical experts, everyone who joined us today, and have a safe and wonderful Discovery Day long weekend.